We have a question regarding a resolution adopted by the UN General Assembly a couple of days ago. This resolution calls for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Ukraine. How does Moscow evaluate the resolution, this call, and the fact that the United States abstained during the vote on this resolution? Firstly, I don't know if you saw it or not, but our position is set out completely and exhaustively in the corresponding press release. It was published on the website, and the link is duplicated in the text of the briefing. Please do not exaggerate the significance of the resolution of the 11th Emergency Special Session of the UN General Assembly adopted on February 24th. We consider it a continuation of a series of politicized and harmful anti-Russian initiatives within the framework of this special session, the necessity of the convening of which we have never recognized. Why? Simply because if one is to speak out, to campaign for peace, to talk about peace, to call for it, it is obvious to everyone now what concrete steps must be taken. The negotiation process calls for a settlement, the refusal to encourage, at the very least, terrorist acts. But in fact, it is high time for the Western community to move toward the condemnation and discussion on specialized platforms of international organizations involved in countering terrorism of what the Kiev regime is doing. To abandon the endless, uncontrolled supply of everything, from weaponry to financial means, for the fueling of what is now the obviously terrorist Kiev regime. These are concrete steps. The fact that they gather and once again engage in Russophobic demagoguery, some of these countries, in fact, does not lead and will not lead to any peace, as you understand. Because at the same time, they are engaged in the exact opposite. I mean, the supplies of armaments and statements that there will be no peace without, well, everyone has their own version. The victory of the Kiev regime, or so to speak, Ukrainian dominance, or requirements that the negotiation table must be moved toward the European Union. Well, to each their own, as they say, they are calling for exactly that. Therefore, we proceed from the fact that the key role and responsibility for maintaining international peace and security belongs to the Security Council of the United Nations, which a year ago adopted Resolution 2774, calling for a peaceful settlement of the conflict in Ukraine. This document, I remind you, unlike the one you mentioned, has a mandatory character and called for a peaceful settlement of the conflict in Ukraine. Today, the task of all interested parties is to consistently and in good faith implement this decision of the UN Security Council. As for the content of the new UN General Assembly resolution, then like all previous non-consensual decisions of this body on the Ukrainian issue, it has nothing to do with humanism, concern for the fates of ordinary peaceful citizens, or the restoration of justice. The sole task pursued by the authors of this document is to attempt to create interference on the airwaves against the background of the real negotiation process currently underway in a trilateral format. The plausible sounding points contained in the resolution, including those on a ceasefire, should not mislead you. Taking into account the perfidy inherent in the Bandera regime and its European sponsors and their inability to negotiate, the call for a ceasefire is nothing other than a deception with the goal of giving the armed forces of Ukraine a breathing space and winning time for regrouping and creating a certain image of, well, let's say, peace lovers and peacemakers. The sane part of the international community understands all of this perfectly well because it has already been repeatedly deceived by such things. Of course, it is noteworthy that the delegation of the United States, acting as a mediator in the trilateral negotiation process, attempted to edit the one-sided and politicized document introduced by Ukraine and European countries. They proposed removing a number of destructive points from it, including the confirmation, as it was written, of the territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. When this could not be done, the Americans refused to support the original draft during the voting. And of course, a more clear and perhaps more consequential signal would have been a U.S. vote against. But even in the current situation, it is obvious that the split in the Western Bloc over the Ukrainian narrative is deepening. It is diverse, multifaceted, ambiguous, but obvious. The European Party of War is afraid of the prospects of establishing peace in Ukraine like the plague, which is why it tries to put spokes in the wheels of pragmatic diplomatic efforts. But all these attempts are doomed to failure. To all the West European waiters of an ultra-liberal comeback in the U.S., a fiery greeting.